Up and coming dilemmas in law enforcement. Up and coming ethical dilemmas in law enforcement. Up and coming ethical dilemmas in law enforcement. To understand up and coming ethical dilemmas in law enforcement, there are several topics that need to be examined. The first of which is law enforcement's beginnings, impact of slave patrols and slave catchers. Why educating officers about that history is important. Less regional country world is connected. Second Amendment rights and the changing drug laws. Changing prosecutor police relationships. Body worn cameras impact on the justice system. Officers on the Brady list effect on police credibility. Overcrowding prison and jail systems. Correctional officer integrity. We will explore all of these topics to come to a better conclusion on up and coming ethical dilemmas in law enforcement. Where did the American idea of law enforcement come from? Many people would be surprised at the answer. Very few officers are taught about the origins of policing. It is very important to understand how it all began. Police are overwhelmingly thought of as an important part of our society. Most citizens hold officers to an extremely high regard, and most are viewed as individuals with a high level of integrity in the community, but their purpose was not always so dignified. It shocks most people to find out that policing got its start from the slave patrols of the 1800s. Slave owners would employ the services of slave catchers to retrieve runaway slaves. These slave catchers would be given authority through law. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 gave the slave catcher that authority to catch runaway slaves, further giving him the power to detain and extradite slaves back to their plantations. This tense relationship with blacks and officers of the law have continued throughout the country's history, but few officers are trained about this volatile relationship. One might ask, why is it important for officers to understand the history? This history is very important to understand, and it should be part of every officer's training. The majority of all neighborhoods being patrolled are lower income black neighborhoods. Studying the history of policing in black culture may give officers better insight on the perspective of the minority, which has been woefully underappreciated. It will begin a dialogue on how to better police and citizen relationships and maybe garner a little more patience in dealing with individuals that feel the weight of being looked upon with disdain as a culture for many years. The truth is, we live in a less regional country. The world is connected, and officers have to deal with it. With the invention of social media, the world has gotten smaller and more connected. Deadly force incidents dealing with the police that were once looked at as regional are not thought of that way anymore. If something happens in Minnesota, reactions will occur all over the United States and sometimes the entire world. Police have to be ready for this newly created dilemma. The murder of George Floyd, witnessed by a cell phone, sent shockwaves throughout the world. It led to weeks of protest all over the country for an incident that took place in Minnesota. This incident put a stain not only on the Minneapolis Police Department, but on police departments all across America. Another dilemma are Second Amendment rights and the changing drug laws. A dilemma for officers will be adjusting to the new gun laws that allow subjects to carry concealed weapons inside of vehicles. This coincides with the legalization of marijuana in many states. Both citizens and officers have to adjust to these changes, making traffic stops more contentious and dangerous. Changing prosecutor-police relationships. A prosecutor relies on the credibility of law enforcement officers. For years, an officer's testimony was considered truth, and this made the relationship between the two branches of enforcement a cohesive partnership. In the future, technology will challenge that credibility. Body-worn cameras' impact on the justice system. The invention of the body-worn camera, better known as the BWC, will aid the officer in capturing evidence in cases. It will be an invaluable tool in the ever-changing climate of policing. It will become so important that without it, the police officer's word will become less credible. Officers on the Brady list affect to police credibility. There are few lists as shameful to a police officer's credibility than the Brady list. An officer gets on this by being dishonest, convicted of a crime, or proven to be untrustworthy in testimony. This fact must be turned over to the defense and can be used against the officer's testimony, and it could affect the case's outcome. The more officers that show up on this list, the more damaging it will become to the police integrity as a whole. A huge dilemma to the correctional system is overcrowding jails and prisons. Overcrowding leads to problems with correctional officers' integrity. Officers are outnumbered by inmates by almost 100 to 1 in some instances. This causes great amount of stress to the officer. The officer is underpaid and underappreciated. The officer is undertrained and unprepared to deal with the high volumes of stress. The vilification of law enforcement discourages the best qualified subjects to apply for correctional jobs. All of these elements lead to correction officer compromising his or her integrity while working in the prison or jail facility. The dilemmas that will affect the future of law enforcement are as follows. It is going to be important to train the history of law enforcement to develop different perspectives of the people law enforcement actually enforce the law upon. Understanding that everyday incidents are more connected than they have ever been. Adjusting to the changing moral standards and legalization of casual marijuana and changes to the gun laws. Allowing the BWC to take the place of police credibility. High volumes of officers on the Brady list affecting credibility, and prison overcrowding and its effect on correctional officer integrity.